The wind came low and hard across the dry, cracked land, the kind of wind that carried dust deep into a man's lungs and made his bones ache. Jedediah Harper stood with his back to the town and his eyes on the wooden cross he'd hammered into the dirt 2 days prior. It was crooked even after 3 tries, and the letters carved into it, *** Martha Harper. Beloved wife, ***, looked like they'd been etched by a man with a shaking hand. Because they had. Behind him, Red Hollow baked in the noon sun, silent except for the creak of saloon doors and the occasional bark of a dog. A dying town, some called it. To Jed, it was already dead. He shifted his baby girl, red-faced, starving, and quiet now from exhaustion, on his shoulder and whispered, "I'm trying, Martha. I swear to God I'm trying." The infant hadn't fed since the funeral. She'd refused goat's milk, cow's milk, and the bottles from the general store. The local women turned their faces away when asked, and Jed didn't blame them. A lone man with a newborn was already strange. Asking for breast milk was downright unnatural. That morning he nailed the sign into the post in front of the general store. Wet nurse wanted, baby ain't eatin'. God help us. The words bled into the wood where his hands had trembled, and he stood back and looked at them like a man waiting for judgment. No one offered a word. The town gave him its silence, same as it had since Martha passed screaming into the dust-stained sheets. By midday the whispers had spread like prairie fire. Jed done lost it. He's bringing strangers into the baby's cradle? Ain't decent. Lucian Briggs was the only one who spoke to him outright. A fleshy man with a crooked smile and a silver tooth, Lucian ran the saloon and thrived on other people's grief. "You post that thing for real?" he asked, pushing open the batwing doors and letting the stink of whiskey and smoke trail behind him. "Thought you was a proud man, Harper?" Jed adjusted the baby's blanket without looking up. "You ever had a child go hungry in your arms, Lucian?" Lucian didn't answer for a while. When he did, his voice was softer. "No, sir. Can't say I have." Jed turned and walked away. He wasn't in the mood for saloon philosophy. He wasn't in the mood for anything but a miracle. That night the storm didn't come, but something else did. He heard the knock just after sundown. 3 slow raps, heavy and sure. Jed didn't move at first. The baby had just fallen into a shallow sleep, and he was afraid any sudden motion might snap her out of it. When the 4th knock came, longer this time, he stood and opened the door. She stood there like a vision out of a fever dream. Barefoot. Brown skin glowing like oiled leather in the fading light. Her dress was simple but tight in all the ways that made a man's thoughts stumble. Her hips swayed just standing still, and her eyes, black, unreadable, seemed to assess and dismiss him in one glance. Her hair was long and unbound, like shadows pouring down her back. "You posted the sign," she said. Jed nodded. His throat was dry. "You know how to help a baby?" "I feed them," she replied. "I've done it before." He didn't ask her name yet. He didn't ask where she came from or what she wanted in return. The baby stirred in her sleep and let out a whimper like a match about to die. That was all the convincing he needed. He stepped aside. She entered without hesitation. She walked into the main room like she already knew it. The furniture, the dust, the grieving air. Jed stood in the doorway, watching her kneel beside the cradle. Her hands were soft but sure as she unwrapped the infant and lifted her gently. The baby fussed, then rooted, then latched. Jed let out a sound he didn't know he'd been holding. It wasn't quite relief. It wasn't joy. It was the sound of something inside him breaking and spilling out. She didn't speak while she nursed. Her face remained still, expression unreadable. The fire cracked behind her, and the baby's soft suckling was the only other sound. After some time, Jed poured water into a tin cup and offered it. She took it without thanks but drank like she needed it. He noticed then that her wrists bore faint scars, the kind made by rope or shackles. "You come from north?" he asked quietly. "I come from hunger," she said, setting the cup down. He didn't press further. There was something sacred about the way she held his daughter, like she was offering more than nourishment, like she was mending something broken. Outside the wind had calmed. Inside the house felt different, less hollow, less haunted. That night Jed didn't sleep. He sat in the rocker across from the cradle and watched them both. The baby slept soundly, full for the first time in days. The woman, Maya she would say later, slept on the floor beside the crib, arm curled protectively around the wood. He lit a cigarette and stared into the embers of the dying fire. Martha's voice came back to him, soft and chiding. "Don't smoke in the house, Jed." He smiled for a moment, then the guilt chased it away. Lucian was right in his own way. Jed had been a proud man once. Sheriff of Red Hollow, a name that meant something. Then Martha took sick, and pride became a luxury he couldn't afford. His daughter came into the world crying through the same blood that took her mother, and Jed never forgave himself for surviving that hour. He thought of what he'd seen in Maya's face. Not kindness, not pity. Something colder, older. A kind of knowing that didn't come from books or sermons. At first light, he brought her bread and coffee. She accepted both and sat at the table with a quietness that filled the room more than noise would have. "You got a name?" he asked. "Maya." "Just Maya?" She looked up. "It's enough." Jed nodded. "You gonna be stayin'?" "That depends on the baby," she said. "She's not done needing me." He watched her as she fed the child again, movements so natural it made his chest ache. There was power in the way she carried herself. Not like a servant, not like someone desperate for coin. More like someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. By midday the town had noticed. Children peeked through fences. Women whispered behind curtained windows. One man, Ed Collier, a drunk and a coward, spat in Jed's direction and muttered, "Indian whore." Jed didn't rise to it, but his hand drifted toward the revolver at his belt all the same. Lucian showed up again, this time with a bottle. "Thought you might need it," he said, nodding toward the house. "Heard she came in barefoot. Heard she's got eyes like night." Jed accepted the bottle but didn't drink. "She's feeding my child. That's all that matters." Lucian snorted. "Jed, I seen women with beauty. But that one? She ain't just beautiful. She's dangerous." Jed didn't answer. Part of him agreed. Another part didn't care. That evening Maya hummed while she rocked the baby. A low, rhythmic tune, foreign and haunting. Jed listened from the porch, bottle untouched beside him. He'd never felt more helpless or more grateful. And he understood in that moment that something had shifted. Not just in his home but in the town. In the wind. In the way the air held its breath when Maya walked through it. He wasn't sure if he'd hired salvation or summoned something else entirely. The baby slept soundly for the first time in a week. Jed didn't. Because just before dawn, he woke to the sound of the wind again, and the soft crunch of boots outside his door. Not Maya's. Not any neighbor he knew. Something colder. He reached for his rifle and stepped to the window. A rider was moving through town, slow and sure. Tall in the saddle, long coat flapping like crow wings. Jed watched as the stranger stopped by the sign still nailed into the post. The man read it, spat in the dirt and rode on. But not away. Toward the house. Jed gripped the rifle tighter. Maya stirred inside, her voice quiet but steady. "They've seen the fire," she said. "Now they'll come for it." Jed didn't answer. He just closed the window and waited for the knock. The air was still when Jed stepped out that morning, but it carried a heaviness that had nothing to do with weather. Red Hollow had gone quiet again, a tight-lipped silence that betrayed its growing discomfort. Word had spread overnight, about the woman, the baby, and Jed Harper's descent into something the town no longer recognized. He could feel their eyes even when no one stood outside. It wasn't just gossip now, it was judgment. Fear even. Inside, Maya moved through the house with a grace that unnerved him. She cleaned without asking, tended the child without instruction, and never once spoke unless spoken to. Her presence filled the home, not loudly, but like smoke slipping through cracks, unseen yet inescapable. The baby, now named Hope, cooed in her arms, pink and full from feeding. There was life in her cheeks that hadn't been there 3 days ago. Jed watched from the doorway as Maya bathed Hope in a tin basin. Her movements were fluid, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. She poured water with one hand and cupped the child's head with the other, humming something soft and wordless under her breath. Her dark hair hung in a thick curtain down her back, and her eyes remained focused, unwavering. "Where'd you learn to do all that?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. She didn't look up. "Where I come from, we don't wait for doctors." Jed leaned against the frame. "And where's that?" Her hands stilled. For a moment he thought she might not answer. Then, with deliberate calm, she said, "Far from here. And too close all the same." He let the subject drop. He wasn't sure what line he was pressing on, but he knew it didn't want to be crossed. There was something about Maya's tone, a weight behind it that warned of deeper waters. Later that afternoon, Lucian came knocking again, uninvited and smelling like smoke and cheap cologne. "Thought I'd check in on ya," he said, eyes drifting toward the window. Jed blocked his view. "We're fine." Lucian pulled out a cigar, rolled it between his fingers. "That right? 'Cause the town's got its drawers twisted. Saying you took in a witch woman. One of them forest types. Wild blood. Some folks say they seen her talking to crows." "She's feeding my daughter," Jed said evenly. That's more than any of you bastards did. Lucian raised both hands in mock surrender. Ain't judging. Hell, I've seen worse arrangements. Just figured you ought to know the preacher's already stirred up. And Marshal Boone? He's a skin, if you're still of sound mind. Jed shut the door without another word. That night, the fire crackled low as Hope slept between them. Maya didn't ask for a separate room. She laid out a blanket near the hearth and stretched out like a cat, unbothered. Her body moved with a confidence that Jed found both mesmerizing and disarming. She didn't care how he looked at her. Didn't flinch when his eyes lingered. If anything, she seemed to let him see, let him wonder. But she never invited the question. You've done this before, Jed said quietly, staring into the flames. Fed someone else's child. Yes. Yours? She didn't answer right away. Then, no one's anymore. The silence stretched long. He thought of his wife, of the final days when the fever made her delirious, whispering to things that weren't there. He remembered how she clutched her belly as Hope cried her first breath. How her last word was Jed's name, spoken like an apology. He looked at Maya, curled around the baby, her hand resting gently on the girl's back. You lose someone too? He asked. She nodded. A long time ago. But the ache, it stays. There was no further explanation, no outpouring of pain. She said it like one might describe a scar, present, permanent, but no longer bleeding. The next morning trouble came. Jed stepped onto the porch, rifle slung loosely over one shoulder, when he spotted two riders approaching from the south road. They moved slow, like they weren't in any particular hurry, but their silhouettes sent a chill down his spine. Both wore dust-stained long coats and wide-brimmed hats, faces hidden behind scarves. One rode tall and straight, the other hunched like a crow over its kill. They didn't stop at the saloon. Didn't hitch their horses at the general store. They rode straight for Jed's house. Inside, Maya stood at the window before Jed could even call to her. She watched them with the stillness of a predator. You know them? He asked. I know the one who hunches, she said. His name is Rawls. The other I don't yet know. Jed cocked his rifle. What do they want? She met his eyes. Me. The riders stopped 10 feet from the porch. Jed stepped out, rifle cradled in his arms. The taller man tipped his hat, revealing weathered features and eyes that looked carved from granite. Afternoon, he said. Jed nodded. State your business. The man didn't blink. Looking for someone. Heard you might be harboring her. Jed's jaw tightened. There's a woman here. She's feeding my child. That's all you need to know. The hunched one spoke then, voice greasy and low. She's got blood on her. Took a man's eyes right out his head in 5 rivers. Made a preacher jump in the river and drown. Left a trail of broken men and dead children. Jed's grip tightened on the rifle. Maya stepped onto the porch then, baby in her arms. The tall man tipped his hat again. Well, there she is. Hope stirred but didn't cry. Maya's expression didn't change. She looked at the riders like she'd already seen this scene play out and had nothing left to fear from it. She ain't yours to take, Jed said. Not while she's nursing my girl. The taller man smirked. Ain't that just the softest thing I've heard? The hunched one shifted in his saddle. She'll come with us. One way or another. Maya stepped forward, voice calm. You come near this child and I'll burn what's left of you. Jed raised his rifle an inch higher. Ride on. Now. For a moment the wind held its breath. Then the tall man nodded once, slow and calculating. You've made your choice, Harper. Hope you know what she's brought to your door. They turned and rode back the way they came. Inside, Maya laid Hope back in the crib, then went to the stove like nothing had happened. She stirred the beans and said nothing. Jed followed her with his eyes, unsure whether to feel grateful or terrified. You gonna tell me what they meant? He asked. They fear what they don't understand, she said. And they twist it into something uglier than the truth. Jed sat down hard in the chair. Then tell me the truth. Maya turned, spoon still in hand. The truth is I escaped from men like them. From their camps, their cages. I walked 3 nights through the woods with nothing but this fire inside me. The fire that fed the boy who couldn't eat, the fire that healed the girl they left for dead. And they hate that. Jed stared at her. You're not just a woman. She smiled faintly. No. But I am that too. The fire popped behind her. Jed said nothing. Later, as night settled over the hills and the wind picked up again, Maya stood by the window, holding Hope in her arms. Outside, the moon cast shadows across the dust like pale fingers. Jed stood beside her, rifle once again in hand. They'll be back, he said. Yes, she replied. He looked at her, at the curve of her jaw and the firelight in her eyes. "But so will I," he said. "I'll be here." She nodded once, and it was all the answer he needed. The night was quiet, but something in the dark shifted. A storm didn't come yet, but the scent of one lingered on the edge of the wind. And in the cradle, Hope slept soundly, cradled by something ancient, something fierce, something human and not. The days turned quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that hummed with the promise of violence. The town kept its distance, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Jed no longer cared. He had found something truer in the silence of his home than in 1,000 greetings down the Red Hollow boardwalk. Hope smiled more often now, her cheeks round and full from Maya's milk, and in those smiles, he felt the stirrings of something like faith. Not in God, but in flesh, resilience, and something rawer, love bound by necessity. Maya didn't speak much about what had happened. She didn't mention Rawls or the other rider. She moved with purpose but never panic. Still, she always kept a knife tucked into her boot now. Jed noticed. He didn't ask. At twilight, Maya stood outside beneath the porch's overhang, her long skirt catching the breeze. The sky burned orange-red, clouds strung like veins across the heavens. She held a bowl of water and slowly poured it down her hands, scrubbing silently. The blood from a rabbit she had gutted for dinner clung to her wrists like cuffs. Jed leaned in the doorway. "You know, most folks would just use the pump." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "And waste it all on a rabbit? You're more Western than you think, Harper." He stepped out, sat on the porch rail. The wind tossed her hair toward him, thick black waves that smelled faintly of cedar and sweat. He wanted to touch it. Instead, he asked, "You ever think about leaving?" She straightened. "Where would I go?" "Anywhere," he said. "South maybe. Over the border. I hear there's desert there. Sand like fire. No memories." She shook her head. "Memories don't care about maps." He looked at her then, not just her face but the long line of her back, the slight tremor in her fingers, the exhaustion held so tight in her shoulders it looked like armor. "You ever miss being held?" he asked, voice lower than before. She stilled, water dripping off her knuckles. "Yes," she said. He stepped closer, every inch closing the space between want and permission. "I ain't asking just to ask, Maya." She turned, eyes catching his like snares. "Then what are you asking?" He raised a hand slowly, brushing her damp wrist. "If you'll let me." Her breath hitched. "Not fear." "What?" "A deep, anchored hunger." She nodded. They didn't rush. They moved through the house like smoke, quiet and inevitable. He unfastened the buttons of her blouse with careful fingers, each pop of fabric an unspoken vow. She pulled off his shirt, eyes trailing across his scarred chest like she was reading scripture. On the floor near the fire, they met in silence, heat between their bodies rising like incense. Her breath was warm against his neck. His hands found the curve of her hips, the soft weight of her thighs. She opened to him not like a woman submitting but like one choosing, every movement hers. They came together slowly, rhythmically, a quiet ache given shape. No words passed between them, but something larger than language did. Understanding, shared grief, healing. Afterward, they lay tangled in a blanket, Hope snoring softly a few feet away. Maya traced her finger along the ridge of a scar on Jed's ribs. "What did this?" "Bayonet," he murmured. "Shiloh. You were Union?" "No. I was a boy with a gun and too much pride. Didn't matter what side." She leaned her head against his chest. "You still bleed for it?" "Every day." The fire crackled beside them. "Maya," he said softly. "Yes." "I ain't ever met a woman like you." She smirked. "That's because I ain't a woman like any you've met." He chuckled. "That's so." She lifted herself slightly, eyes resting on his. "I was raised to fight. Not just men but ideas. Chains. Traditions. My mother nursed orphans on the run. My father taught me to shoot before I could read. I've walked barefoot across plains chasing food and freedom both. I don't bend, Jed. Even when I want to." He touched her cheek, thumb grazing the ridge of her jaw. "I don't want you to bend. Just stay." She nodded once, but her face grew distant. That night, while Jed slept with one arm wrapped around her waist, Maya sat awake, staring into the fire. She heard the whistle before the hoofbeats, soft, eerie, echoing across the ridge like a memory. They had returned. In the morning, they found a message carved into the fence post. 3 days. Jed studied it with clenched fists. "They're not gonna ask next time." Maya nodded. "No. They'll take." Jed ran a hand down his face. "Then we don't wait. We strike first." She turned toward him, eyebrows raised. You want to ride into town and shoot them in daylight? No, he said. But we need help. I know a man. Used to ride with me during the war. He's up near Copper Ridge. He owes me. Maya crossed her arms. And what will you promise him in return? Jed didn't blink. Nothing. I saved his sister from a fire. That debt never cleared. She considered that. All right. Go. But come back before nightfall. He left before the sun hit the trees, rifle strapped tight, horse riding hard toward the north. Maya watched him disappear over the hill, then turned to the house. She moved quickly now, gathering dried herbs from her pouch, weaving them into strings she hung over the doors and windows. Not superstition. Warnings. She changed the baby, sang to her in a low, ancient dialect, a melody passed down through women who fed and fought with equal grace. Hope stared up at her, eyes wide, trusting. Maya's lips trembled as she kissed her forehead. She was already preparing for war, even as her heart prayed for peace. By dusk, Jed returned, his horse bleeding from the hooves but his eyes sharp. They're coming at sunrise, he said. Rawls brought 2 more with him. My friend's name is Gideon. He's got a shotgun and a death wish. Maya nodded. I'll prepare. That night they didn't speak much. They made love again, this time not with urgency, but with a stillness that hurt more. Each touch was deliberate, like sealing a goodbye. When he whispered her name, it sounded like a plea. And when she clutched him afterward, it was the first time she shook. Neither of them mentioned the word, tomorrow. But it hung there, like thunder just beyond the ridge. The dawn broke slower than usual, dragging light across the land like a hesitant breath. Fog clung to the trees, drifting low over the fields in pale threads, and the morning birds held their songs. Inside the house, Maya moved without sound. She had braided her hair back, wrapped a leather sash around her waist, and laced her boots tight enough to pinch. Over her shoulder hung a small satchel filled with dried leaves, a flask of red powder, and a blade longer than any kitchen knife Jed owned. Hope stirred softly in the crib. Maya bent down, kissed her brow. The baby cooed, oblivious to the weight in the air. In the yard, Jed hammered the last plank into a crude barricade beside the shed. Sweat soaked his shirt. Gideon stood a few paces off, chewing tobacco and checking the sight on his shotgun. You really think she's worth all this? Gideon asked without looking up. Jed paused, breath shallow. Yeah, I do. She got you that twisted, huh? Jed turned toward him, hammer still in hand. She fed my child. Stood between me and death. That ain't twisted. That's loyalty. Gideon snorted. Loyalty gets you buried. Jed didn't answer. He went back to work. By midday the wind shifted. The fog began to burn away, and the birds resumed their cautious chirping. The town, distant on the horizon, seemed to lean forward like a man watching a knife fight. No one had offered to help. No letters came. Only the memory of their faces, peering from behind drawn curtains as if witnessing the unraveling of something cursed. Maya stood at the edge of the porch, eyes locked on the hills. They'll come from the ridge. The tall one rides in front, but Rawls will flank right. Jed stepped beside her. How do you know? I know his rhythm. He's like a vulture, never strikes head-on. Gideon tapped his shotgun. What about the others? They'll wait for the signal. Rawls always plays with his food. Jed scanned the horizon. Then we don't give them time to circle. Maya looked at him, expression unreadable. If I don't make it, take hope and ride west. Keep moving. Don't stop until the desert swallows your name. You're not dying today. You don't get to decide that, she said. Neither of them smiled. The afternoon passed in preparation. They rigged tripwires along the outer fence, poured oil near the front path, and buried iron nails beneath the porch steps. Maya dusted each doorway with her red powder, whispering something sharp-sounding under her breath. Jed watched, uneasy. That magic. She looked at him. Call it memory. Of mothers before me. Wives who buried children. Nurses who bled into the land so others wouldn't. He nodded, said nothing more. At last, the sun kissed the horizon. Then they came. 3 riders crested the ridge, silhouettes against the molten sky. Rawls rode hunched as ever, cloak dragging like a rag across the dirt. Beside him, the tall man wore a rifle on his back and a smile sharp as wire. Behind them, 2 more rode in AV formation, their movements slow and calculated. Jed raised his rifle. Not one damn word. We shoot when they reach the split in the path. Maya was already moving. She slipped around the side of the house, silent as dusk, eyes burning with focus. The wind stilled. At the path split, the tall rider slowed. Jed's finger tensed on the trigger, but Maya's voice rang out before he could fire. "Rawls?" The rider froze. Then he laughed. "Well now, look who grew teeth." She stepped out from behind the shed, blade glinting in her hand. "Leave. While you can." The tall man drew his revolver. "You threatening us, witch?" Maya raised her hand, and in a swift, violent motion, slashed her palm open. Blood dripped into the dirt, and a gust of wind kicked up dust like a slap across the face. "Last warning," she said. But Rawls was already spurring his horse forward. Jed fired. The bullet struck Rawls in the shoulder, knocking him sideways. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked across the clearing. The tall man shouted orders, but Gideon's shotgun roared, tearing through one of the flank riders. The remaining attacker veered left, taking cover behind a trough. Maya moved fast, too fast for the eye to track. She leapt across the fence, landed on the tall man's horse mid-gallop, and slammed him to the ground. Her blade bit deep into his thigh. He screamed, rolled, tried to aim. She kicked the gun from his hand, pressed the knife to his throat. Jed gunned down the last rider, who collapsed behind the trough with a ragged groan. Then silence. Rawls rose slowly, blood soaking his coat, one eye wide with disbelief. "You," he spat. "You don't die." Maya stepped toward him, blade dripping. "Not for men like you." Rawls pulled a hidden derringer from his belt. Jed saw it too late. The shot rang out. Maya stumbled. Blood bloomed on her side. Jed roared, vaulted the fence, tackled Rawls to the ground. They fought, fists flying, breath heaving. Jed's rage poured out through every punch. When Rawls finally stopped moving, Jed stood, trembling, fists covered in blood. He ran to Maya. She was on her knees, hand clutched over the wound. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. "It missed anything vital," she said, breathless. "Just bleeding bad." Jed tore a strip from his shirt, pressed it to her side. "You hold on, hear me?" She nodded faintly. "I'm not done. Not yet." Gideon approached, wiping his brow. "That it?" Jed looked around. For bodies. Smoke. Silence. "Yeah," he said. "That's it." They carried Maya inside. Jed cleaned the wound, hands trembling as he stitched her closed. She barely winced. Gideon stood by the door, watching but didn't speak. When it was over, Jed sat beside her bed, holding her hand. Her skin was warm, pulse faint but steady. "You saved me," he whispered. She looked at him through half-lidded eyes. "No. We saved each other." Hope cried then, from the cradle in the corner, and Maya smiled weakly. Jed rose, lifted the child, brought her over. He laid Hope on Maya's chest, and the baby quieted instantly, pressing close as if sensing her mother of fate still breathed. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it carried no threat. Just the scent of ash, iron, and earth. They had survived the night. But survival wasn't peace. And the road ahead, long, dusty, dangerous, had just begun to take shape. The morning came with the sound of birdsong and the scent of wet dirt. The storm from the night before had passed quickly, but its remnants lay scattered across the porch, broken twigs, puddled footprints, a snapped horseshoe lodged in the mud. Inside the house, a hush blanketed the air like prayer. Maya slept, her wounds stitched and salved, one arm draped protectively over Hope, who had dozed off against her chest. The baby's breath rose and fell in tiny, peaceful waves. Jed stood near the window, rifle in hand. His eyes scanned the tree line, not in fear but in expectation. Nothing moved. The woods, for the first time in weeks, seemed still. Gideon sat at the kitchen table, whittling a piece of cedar into something shapeless. He didn't look up as he said, "They won't come back. Not for a while." Jed didn't answer. He watched a hawk glide over the ridge, wings catching the last of the dawn light. Then he spoke. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "It wasn't the blood. Or the shooting. It's that it felt normal. Like I was made for it." Gideon spat into a tin cup. "You were. So was I. Ain't something to be proud of. But it's truth." Jed turned toward him, face unreadable. "What if I don't want to be that man anymore?" "Then stop picking up that rifle," Gideon said. Simple as that. But it wasn't simple. Not really. Jed knew the land didn't care about intentions. The world carved men into shapes it needed, killers, fathers, liars. The desert didn't ask permission. It just took. Maya stirred in the bedroom. Jed went to her. She blinked slowly, wincing as she adjusted her weight. "How bad's the bleeding?" she asked. "Slowed down. You'll live." She glanced at the window. "Rawls?" Gone. Buried out back. Maya's lips twitched. Not a smile. Just acknowledgement. Jed sat beside her, brushing hair from her brow. I'm thinking about leaving. She stiffened slightly. Where? South. Desert country. Quiet place where no one remembers my name. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced the blanket's edge. You running? No, he said. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Maya looked at him for a long time. And you want me and Hope with you? Yes. Why? Because there's no version of this life I want without you both in it. She exhaled slowly. You sure? Never been more. She closed her eyes, let the silence hold them. When she opened them again, something had settled. Something real. She nodded once. Then let's go. But the town had other plans. By noon word had spread. Rawls and his men were dead. Buried in shallow graves near the Harper place. The preacher's boy saw the bodies before the dirt was tossed, ran to tell his father, who told the sheriff, who told the mayor, who told the people. And the people, fueled by fear and the ease of blame, came together like wildfire. Jed saw them coming from the porch, 12 men, 2 wagons, and the preacher up front, holding a worn Bible like a weapon. Gideon muttered, "Here we go again." Jed stepped down from the porch, rifle cradled in both arms. What do you want? The preacher's voice was smooth but brittle. We heard you were harboring a killer. Said she used witchcraft. Said she cursed Rawls. Jed tilted his head. You mean defended her life? Protected my child? You can't hide behind sympathy, Jed. You brought darkness to our town. We saw what she did. She bled for this land, Jed said. What have you done but whisper behind closed doors? Another man stepped forward. Emmett, the blacksmith. We don't want trouble. But you can't stay. Not with her. Jed's grip on the rifle tightened. She's not going anywhere. Behind him, the door creaked open. Maya stepped out, pale but upright, holding Hope against her chest. Her blade hung from her belt. The red powder marked her hands again. The preacher's eyes narrowed. You bring that child into this too? I saved this child, Maya said. Where were you when Jed cried for help? When the mother died screaming in her own blood? Whispers stirred among the men. Doubt. Jed stepped closer to Maya. This ends now. We're leaving. You can let us go or you can try and stop us. Emmett looked at the preacher. Then at Maya. Then down at the dirt. I ain't raising my rifle against a woman carrying a child, he said. One by one the others lowered their weapons. The preacher scowled. You're making a mistake. No, Jed said. I'm making a choice. They left that night. No fanfare. No goodbye letters. Gideon gave them his horse and a bag of jerky. You ever see me again, he said to Maya, don't thank me. Just nod. She nodded. They rode under moonlight, the desert wind guiding them south. The land flattened, widened, and the stars multiplied overhead. Hope slept in Maya's arms, wrapped in a blanket of cotton and calm. They rode in silence for a long time. Then Jed spoke. You scared? Maya glanced at the stars. Always. But you're still riding. Yes, she said. Because scared ain't the same as broken. Ahead the desert rose like a promise. Shadows stretched long behind them, but none dared to follow. They would find a place, eventually, a ridge, a cave, a ruin, where the past couldn't catch them. Jed glanced over at her, the woman who had walked into his life not as salvation, but as revolution. He reached for her hand. And for the first time since the day he buried his wife, he smiled without guilt. Behind them Red Hollow fell into legend. A place of blood and fire, of silence and screams. But also of choice, of change, and of love reborn in the dust.